Today I have Jamie Brenner, best-selling author here. She is amazing, and I cannot wait to share her newest book with you, Blush, and all the good things that she has to talk about today. Jamie, please introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about your book.
Okay, hi everyone. Erin, thank you for having me on Amazon Live. This is so much fun and such a great way for readers and writers to connect. So this platform is fantastic. My name is Jamie Brenner. Blush is my 7th novel. I've been publishing a book a summer for the past 6 or 7 years. And this is a bit of a departure for me because instead of being set at a beach, it is set at a winery. And it's about a family who owns a vineyard, and they've owned the vineyard for generations. And this summer, the vineyard is in trouble. And the book begins where the daughter of the founders, a 50-something woman named Leah, returns to the family winery where her mother, Vivian, is grappling with the changes. And then the granddaughter, Sadie, also joins for vacation. And what these women find, instead of the usual bucolic escape for June and July and August, they find a reckoning with the past. And one aspect of this reckoning with the past is Sadie discovers her grandmother's long-defunct book club, novels from the 1980s, like Chances by Jackie Collins or Mistral's Daughter by Judith Krantz. And Sadie cannot believe her grandmother, her elegant grandmother, and her classy friends were reading such outrageous books. And what happens is the 3 generations of women form their own book club and begin reading these books together. And through the words of these women of the past, they start finding their way through their problems of the present.
One of the things I loved, a quote that you put in the book, is you said, "When women gather, there is power." And I love that so much. I love that. I felt like something you said on a podcast recently, you said you used to find your grandma's or your mom's books and read them. And I feel like that was me as a kid too, at 12, sneaking the Judith Krantz books, and, you're hiding in your room reading them, and you're like, I don't think I'm supposed to be reading these. But that made it even more fun. And I just was talking to one of my daughter's friends the other day. My daughter's 12 and her friend's 13. And I bought her a bunch of books for her birthday. That was yesterday. And I'm like, I hope your mom's okay with these books. And she had sent me a wish list. And then I thought, well, this cannot be any different than me stealing my mom's Jackie Collins and, sneaking off and reading them. I read everything I could get my hands on as a kid, anything. And this book, what made me drawn to this whole thing was, I'll be 40 next month, so I'm guessing we're similar in age range. And that took me back to those 80s and 90s of taking all the books and reading them. And I loved that there was so many dynamics in here that you addressed that were hot buttons right now with, I don't want to give too much away, but I did write this note down that I just thought was really interesting. You said Vivian did the backbreaking, well, this is what I noticed. I don't know if you said this. Vivian did the backbreaking work alongside Leonard and yet was not treated as if she had value at times. And she described herself as a hopeful pioneer, yet out of the loop and treated as a second-class family member and not like a rightful heir to this family dynasty. And yet she created her own, her own little role in this. And I thought that was good. And, you didn't paint this family as having perfection or, because no family is perfect, right? And I thought that just having all the different dynamics in this was just so perfect. And what was your favorite part about writing this book?
Well, I had wanted to write a book that paid homage to these 1980 novels for a long time. So the fact that it was able to come together in this story, my favorite part was being able to incorporate these books, these were massive bestsellers. These were not obscure novels by any stretch. They topped the New York Times bestseller list for months. What you brought up is the dichotomy between the reality on the ground for a lot of women trying to either have a say in how their family life was run or trying to have a career, the disconnect between that obstacle-ridden path and the heroines of these novels was fascinating to me. And I think for a lot of women, these books were the world as they wish it actually was, rather than the world they were finding themselves living in. For example, I researched the first vineyards on the North Fork, where this book is set, the North Fork of Long Island. And the first vineyard was founded by a couple, a man and a woman, and her name was Louisa Thomas Hargrave. And in her memoir, she wrote a book called The Vineyard. In her memoir, she writes that although they were a team, when they were trying to do the paperwork for the business, she was not allowed to have her name on the contracts because it could only be head of households, which was her husband. And this was 1971. So then cut to 10, 15 years later, you have a book like Chances and a heroine like Lucky Santangelo, who is taking on the world, going head to head with her powerful father. And for some women, it was a fantasy, but for some women, it was a playbook. And that's really what I wanted to explore in Blush, because as a teenager, the messages in these novels were very different than the messages I was getting from society at large about what I could do, what I should do, and how to do it.
I love that. One of the things I felt about this book is that it made me feel all the emotions, you know, anger, resentment, sadness, disappointment, but then pulled it back together in a new generation that just laid track for future, for hope. And there were so many moments in this where I was like, what? Like so angry at her brother. I was like, what is he doing? And then, you know, there was just such a madness to their method to their madness that you unveiled that was so good. And I feel like with these generations of change, books still give us so much solace and refuge, even when we go through such stressful times, whether it be whatever we dealt with in the 80s, whatever we dealt with in the 90s, whatever we dealt with today. Books are just the best escape. I think one of my author friends said recently something, there's just nothing like cracking that book at night when you go to bed, that peace it brings, that comfort it brings. And that is just something that this book was incredible at doing. I couldn't stop recommending it to everyone. I told my aunts about it because, you know, they grew up reading so many of, you know, all these 80s and 90s authors too, that we also linked down below. But Blush was just really a time travel book too. I feel like this was, I don't know. Why are men so hard-headed sometimes? I love that you had talked about that in the book with, you know, why Leonard resisted the idea of women in business and why he resisted the rosé and, you know, wasn't willing to be humble enough to grow with the times and things like that. And gosh, I think back to the 70s, and I think something I think women don't even realize today is that in the 70s, women couldn't even have their own bank accounts barely. And yet business entrepreneurs, and there was just such a dynamic to that they had to push through, let alone building a business, but pushing through all those ceilings that were so much lower than they are today, even though we still have them. So, gosh, I don't even know where to begin. There were so many quotes in this book. Is it okay if I read a little piece that I loved?
Sure.
Okay, one of my favorites, you guys listening and watching, which we do have a lot of people watching. And if you guys have any questions, definitely put them in the chat for Jamie, and I'll let her know so she can answer them. But one of my favorite parts was a part in the book where her mom says, go inside, you don't belong out here, when they were getting ready to discuss their book. And she said, of course she did. No matter what was happening, Leah knew it was the only place she'd ever belong. And I think that can be such a constant with so many of us. Like books are, like life can change, life can kick you in the pants, but books are the one place we always belong. And I just thought that was really good. So when you were writing this, well, it was probably really fun to research, I'm guessing. And from listening to your past podcasts, I know you do a lot of research into every book that you do, and you're working on something pretty cool right now. Are you able to talk about the Jewel book that you're working on right now?
Sure, I would love to. So yes, research is an extremely fun part, probably one of the most fun parts of writing a novel, because it's the moment where anything is possible and you're just sort of gathering. So researching wine and cheese was fascinating. And it was definitely a little bit of a, what can I possibly do next that could be equally as rewarding and had, I think, as much universal fascination for my readers. And I found that jewelry was a really great place to go next, because jewelry is so connected in our hearts with memories of either important people in our lives or important moments in our lives. You know, the symbolism, having something passed down. So my next book is about a jewelry dynasty, sort of like Tiffany's, if you can think of Tiffany's, and the people behind it. And it's a family that made their fortune on selling diamond engagement rings and the notion of diamonds and love. But the women in this family have always had terrible luck in love. And when the book begins, a granddaughter who's been cast out makes her way back into the fold to sort of reclaim what should have been hers. And the novel is called Gilt, but spelled G-I-L-T, like when something is covered in gold, but not gold underneath.
I love that. Do you have a release date tentatively set for that yet?
June 2022. Probably close to the Blush release date, so late June.
Okay, so you say you write a summer book every year. Is that a thing, or you just, it's just what it is? Is summer a thing for you?
Yeah. I don't know how, that was just always the schedule I was on. And then I feel like in the past 8 years, summer reading has sort of exploded and it's become this category unto itself. So I feel like we're in this, we've got pushed into these silos where it's like fall is like serious literary reading and yes. Summer is fun, like book club reading.
Yes.
And that's just sort of the rhythm that we're in. And of course, there's exceptions to everything. But I love publishing in the summer because it's such a great time to go around to bookstores and meet people and sit outside. Of course, you know, the past 2 summers have been challenging, but in a perfect world, you know, there's just so much mobility and joy in summer events. So to have a book and to have the excuse to travel and go to different beach towns and different book clubs has been really such a joy. So I spend all winter writing, which, you know, I don't really want to be outside anyway. And then come May and June, I get an excuse to put my laptop down and just be out there with readers. So it's been really a great schedule.
That is a great schedule in a non-pandemic world where you write all winter and then get to book promote all spring and summer. And yes. Then, you know, go back into hibernation mode, fall and winter, and write. But how is that? I have a question though. How does it, do you have to like make a summer vibe in your house when you're writing about summer in the winter?
I usually do create like a mood board with images of what I think the characters look like, but also lots of photos of the setting. So if the book is set in Cape Cod, I have snapshots of Provincetown all over the wall that I'm facing. Same thing with the vineyard. I had walked back and forth through the fields and I had pictures of the vines at different stages, and the veranda that I set so many scenes on in the book was actually this back pagoda terrace on this vineyard that I visited. So I had pictures of that. And it really helps me. Number one, it's escapism for me to write in a different season. You know, so every day I sit down to work and I get to go to a place mentally where I like to be. And it's not hard for me to slip back into that frame of mind because I want to be there.
I love that. I love that you wrote this. I'm glad that you did so that we can escape there too. Okay, I have an important question. What was the vibe of reading and writing like for you as a child? Where did all of this come from?
I was always obsessed with, as so many of us, you know, avid readers are, always obsessed with books. It was as you said, the one place where I felt like I belonged. And I even remember I went to see the movie The Outsiders when it came out in the early 80s. And I was so enthralled with the story. The only way I could deal with that was to sit down and write my own version of the story. So I had a typewriter when I was like in second grade, third grade, and I was writing as far back as I could remember. However, I never believed I could actually be an author. And in fact, going back to our earlier conversation, when I told my fourth grade teacher I want to be a writer when I grow up, she looked at me and she said, well, maybe you can be a teacher. And I mean, being a teacher is a great profession, but that's not what I said to her. And I guarantee if I'd been a little boy, that would not have been her response.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. My high school grammar teacher, I always have wanted to, I didn't know that people didn't plan like books in their heads. I thought that was what everyone did. And one day I told a friend, don't you do that? Don't you write stories in your head? She's like, no, that's weird. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I remember thinking someday I want to write, or just even if I write for me, you know, for fun. And I remember my basic grammar teacher saying, yeah, you can't even do basic grammar. And how could you be an author? And I remember thinking, that's what editors are for, you dummy.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. I mean,
it's amazing how people can take a kid's dream and smash it and not even realize they're smashing a dream.
Well, I think so many, I mean, I know a writer, I know a bunch of writers who became lawyers because, you know, they were never encouraged to be creative, but they knew they had this aptitude for narrative, which, you know, trial lawyers have to tell a narrative in their work. And, you know, how many people went through so much school and down so much heavy work for a career path they didn't really want because of the messaging they got as children or young adults, telling them to be realistic about their careers. And it's really hopefully changing. And I think that goes across the gender spectrum. I think creative people don't often have a lot of champions in their young life. And the ones that do are very fortunate.
I think it's really interesting that you just said that about lawyers becoming authors, because in the past 2 months that I've been doing the show, I've had at least a dozen lawyers that are now writers. And I thought, wow, there's a lot. I mean, I would think being a lawyer is just as lucrative, but it's not where their passion ever was.
Right.
And I just had JC Lee on the other day. She's a former litigator. Elise Friedland, she's a former litigator. I mean, Darby Kane, who's a Helen K. Diamond, former litigator. Yeah. And they're all best-selling authors now.
Yeah.
Wow, that is so true. Thank goodness you didn't listen to your teacher. Thank goodness. Yeah. I mean, you could have been a teacher. That would be great. But you know what?
Who knows? You could write and then you could be teaching writing. But, you know, you don't. That wasn't the point of her remark. Her remark was very pointed, and which only made me want to prove her wrong anyway.
Oh, so. Absolutely. I feel like when people say things like, you can't do something, I want to do it even more.
Exactly. That's the spirit.
And I love that there was a veranda that you described in the book, because I could picture them all sitting there, and then I could picture her pool, and it just was great to go to this place and see all the places that you talked about in the book. So as a kid, well, I guess as a kid you were with your typewriter, which, gosh, remember when we were all back on typewriters? Thank goodness for laptops now. But when did you write your first book?
So the first book that was published?
Or just in general?
I mean, I probably wrote like novellas even in middle school. And I was always working on a novel. Like there wasn't a time where I wasn't working on a novel. It just got to the point where I realized if I don't put this out there at some point, like take the plunge and try to really do this, you know, it really might never happen. And I think when you're young, you know, you feel like you have all the time in the world. And then at a certain point, as an adult, you feel the clock ticking a little more, and you can't listen to fear or your inner critic anymore. You just have to go for it. And, you know, I was around 40 when I started publishing professionally, but I'd always worked in book publishing because I didn't believe I could actually be an author, but I knew, the only thing I wanted to do was work in books. And working in books helped me be less afraid because I saw that, there wasn't a magic to it, that even the best authors handed in messy manuscripts, and there were a team of people behind every author, publicists, editors, agents helping them. And it made it much more like I could picture how it happened more and take the leap because I saw behind the scenes. It wasn't a big, mysterious leap after a while.
I love that. So I think I did read that you did work in publishing before are you a writer full time now?
I am, yes.
And you worked for Vogue, you said. How was that? That sounds really dreamy. How was that? What did you do?
Okay, so I was working at barnesandnoble.com when they launched their website, which to me seemed crazy because I'm like, who's going to buy books online? I thought I was like, this job's going to last 6 months. So I got recruited by a headhunter when Vogue decided they wanted a website and they wanted to try to integrate showing fashion shows and selling directly online. But I really did not like it. I missed book people. Like, book people are just a specific breed, and I took for granted what it's like to work with book people. And I did not stay at Vogue very long because it wasn't like apples and apples working in one place or the other. It was apples and oranges, and I quickly went back to my comfort zone.
I do think you're absolutely right. Book people are a special breed, and just amazing to be surrounded by books, authors, the things that we love, the escape that we love. And that actually is really great advice. What advice would you have for an aspiring creative or writer?
Number one, it's very important to be reading everything, especially in the genre area where you think you might want to write. And there's a book that I've read a few times over my creative life that's really helped keep me centered. And it's called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron.
Love it.
Yes.
Love it. Yes.
And especially in this age of so much competing for our attention, it helps you kind of like quiet the noise and focus on like that part of you that's speaking, that's part of you that's telling stories. And in order to get the book written, you can't worry about who the publisher or getting an agent or Instagram or any of those things. Like, you have to find a quiet place where it's just you and that inner voice. And, there's this saying that writing isn't making something up, it's getting something down. And I think one of the problems today is we're so crowded that we lose our ability to hear what we need to hear to get it down. So that book always brings me back to the place I need to be to produce pages.
Do you follow the morning pages routine every morning?
I do.
Yeah.
And when I stop.
I do too. I'm not super consistent, but pretty consistent. And I have to say, even just getting it, if you guys are just watching this and you have no idea what we're talking about, and if my moderator, my husband, can put the link in for The Artist's Way in the message, it's by Julia Cameron. And she is amazing. Her basic theory is you get 3 pages of basically a brain dump down every single day. And for me, it just helps when I feel overwhelmed with everything that I have to do, because it kind of centers me back. Even if you're not a writer or you're not a creator, or maybe you're just a mom or a wife who's just so busy and you need to get kind of your ducks in a row. It's just a great concept. And Julia Cameron, thank you for putting that link in there. Julia Cameron really is a pioneer of that in that space, whether you're an artist or it's just a soothing way to have a daily practice. So that is really great advice. I definitely think it is a helpful book, and she has some amazing books. And I listened to a podcast recently. I should see if she'll be on the show. She would be a really fun guest.
Absolutely. She is a pioneer. The book is, I think it's 25 plus years old.
Yes.
And even when you read it, she talks about, shutting things off. And this is predating cell phones even. And, she still had to remind people to find a way to be quiet. But I think what you were saying is it's not just for writers. It's almost a form of meditation.
Yes.
Where you set this time aside, and like you said, you just kind of download without planning or having to be, just write. And it's an incredible exercise.
Absolutely. What are you reading right now?
I am reading a nonfiction book right now that reads like a novel. It's the characters are like better than fiction. I'll show you. It is called Empire of Pain. And it's about the family who invented OxyContin and essentially created the opioid crisis.
Holy cow.
It's a fascinating, it's a pharmaceutical dynasty that you could not make this stuff up. So I'm reading that. And I am rereading Mistral's Daughter because I'm going to be doing a book club discussing it, because people have said to me, they keep asking me if they haven't read the novels that I mentioned in Blush. They say, which one should I start with? So I've been recommending Mistral's Daughter because it's my favorite. So I'm rereading it to sort of think of discussion questions.
Do you ever think how these authors, I know most of them have passed away now. It's been, decades since some have passed. But do you ever think maybe like, I don't know, half a century from now, people will be like, hey, did you read Blush?
Oh my gosh. I hope, honestly,
make you think about that, and like another generation picking up Blush and talking about, oh my gosh, in the 80s and then 2020. And
Erin, I know I was saying this to you earlier. I hope books are still around.
Oh, they will be.
I think people have a better chance of finding this conversation, this broadcast, than they do of finding a book in 50 years.
But yeah, we said the same thing about books probably in the 80s and 90s. We were like, oh, imagine if they're all digital by then. Books aren't going anywhere. As long as we've all got stories in our heads, they're not going anywhere.
I hope. But that's why I really appreciate a place to discuss books, to buy books, celebrate books, keep the fires burning,
Absolutely. Yeah. What are you watching right now?
I am watching on Hulu that show Only Murders in the Building with Steve Martin and Martin Short and Selena Gomez. Are you familiar with this?
No. Okay. What was it called again?
So cute. Okay. It's called Only Murders in the Building.
Okay.
And it's about these two older guys who are obsessed with true crime podcasts. And then, what do you know? There's a death in their building. They live in this grand building like the Dakota in New York City. So they decide to start amateur sleuthing what really happened. And they team up with Selena Gomez and they investigate this death and create their own podcast. And it's like comedic and just so delightful, like such a great, joyful escape from reality.
That sounds good. That sounds like a fabulous one. And now that you have guilt probably in editing, what are you going to work on after that? Do you have any good ideas in the hopper?
I just handed it in. Yes. Thank gosh. It's finally in there. I am working on my book for the following year, but it's too soon to even talk about. I have the idea, but I haven't really started yet, except for some outlining and character sketches and research.
What is your favorite part about writing a book? Is it the beginning when you get to kind of lay track and dream up all these people? Or is it, it can't be the editing, but I have met authors that love editing and I'm like, who did this to you? What happened?
Oh my goodness.
They love editing. There's this one author I interviewed. She says, no, that's my favorite part. And I was like, what? That sounds awful, but okay. So what is your favorite part of all this process?
Like you said, it's the beginning because it's so free and it's only possibility. There's once the book is down on paper, there's inherent limits. Like it is what it is, and you can edit it and you can fix it, but that's, very mechanical work. But the beginning is like the true creative experience where the sky's the limit and the book could be anything. And to me, you can't be wrong in the beginning. Like once you start writing, mistakes happen. Editing to me is always fixing mistakes, right? Like if it was perfect, you wouldn't have to edit it. So I hate feeling like, I'm just fixing. The beginning, there's no mistakes to be made because it's all just, freedom and trying something new.
I love that. Well, where can we find you on social?
I'm on Instagram probably too much. It's at Jamie Brenner Writes. And I find that to be the best way to like share what I'm doing or giveaways or when my next book's coming out or what I'm looking at for research. Like recently I've started sharing just some beautiful jewelry images that sort of kept me going while I was writing Guilt. And I have a newsletter on my website, jamiebrenner.com. And most recently, I've been organizing book clubs for people who don't already have one, or people who do have one can reach out to me that way so I can zoom in and talk to them while they're reading Blush or any of my other novels. So those are the two main ways that I'm in contact with my readers.
I love that so much. I told my aunts about your book and they immediately went out and got it. And I know my aunt is having her, she works in like a senior citizens place, and she's having them all read Blush because think about it, that was their 30s in the 80s and 90s. So there's like hundreds of them that are going to be reading Blush here soon. And so that's just such a great way to trickle down effect, is to tell more people who tell people. And this was the kind of book where, and I do this a lot, but probably not with every book I read, but I'll say, you have to get this book. You have to get this book. So I sent pictures to my aunt, and she was so slow at getting it. So I just sent her one on Amazon really quick. I'm like, whatever, it's coming Tuesday. Start reading it so we can talk about it.
Oh, thank you so much.
So that was really fun. So, well, thank you so much for being on the show. This was great, you guys. I have Blush pulled up. I see it going up in the chat. So I know a lot of you guys have been buying as we've been talking. This was just a fabulous read and just took me back. And I loved all the romance plots, and I loved the story. I can't give anything away. I'm such terrible about not doing spoilers, but this is one of those reads that you curl up with your favorite glass of wine or your favorite, you know, beverage, hot tea, whatever. And just, I wouldn't even consider this a beach read because I kind of read beach reads year round, but like you said, sometimes when it gets really cold out, you're like, I think I need to escape and go to another sunny place. Yeah. So thank you so much for being on the show. And I'd love to have you back in the summer when Guilt comes out.
You got it.
All right. Awesome. We'll stand by, and I will go ahead and close this out. Thank you so much.